Hello, welcome to another Brookbanks podcast. I'm Ben Wakeling, your host, head of cost and commercial here at Brookbanks, and I've got with me today Gerrad Mukuyu, who is also part of the cost and commercial team here at Brookbanks. He is a senior cost consultant. Today, the topic of choice is life cycle costing. So, Gerrad, before we get stuck into life cycle costing and what it is, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Ben. So, like you said, my name is Gerrad Mukuyu. I'm a senior cost consultant at Brookbanks. I have about 7 years of experience working in construction consultancy, working in performance assurance teams and commercial cost management teams across different industries. And I have a keen interest in sustainability and life cycle costing. And that's why we're here today. So, yeah, ready to kick it off.
Excellent. Good. Well, you're the right man to chat to about this then. So, for those listening who are new to life cycle costing, and it's a completely alien phrase to them, tell us a little bit about what it is and what it means.
Life cycle costing is essentially looking at the cost of an asset over its whole life. We're looking at the energy use, the maintenance, the replacement cost, and eventually the end of life cost as well. So not just capital expenditure, so full cost of the asset over its time.
Okay, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because it seems to me like a relatively recent thing that people are talking about. So normally it's what is the cost of my building to
Yep.
build, and the conversation ends there. But this is very much what is the cost of my building to build, and actually how much is it going to cost me over the life cycle of the building? I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years, depending on
Yeah.
what kind of building it is. Okay, excellent. So at what stage then in a project do the biggest life cycle cost decisions kind of get talked about and get
Yeah.
locked in to have the biggest effect? And I suppose it's a two-parter question. The first part is that. The second part is, do many clients, in your experience,
Mhm.
are they aware of that at the time, or and are they just focused solely on what is the cost of my building?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, very relevant in our job. So we generally look at including life cycle costing early stages, concept stage, I would say stage 1 to 2, REBA stage 1 to 2. The reason being, by the time you get to stage 3, I think they say 80% of the whole total cost has already been factored in. So your facade is already put in, your M&E strategy has already been developed. You already know what's in the envelope already. So doing it after that seems a bit productive. But
Mm.
if you pull it back to concept stage, you're looking at really influencing your design with this life cycle costing. So usually, to answer the first part of your question, usually you would look at, early stages of the REBA sort of life plan. And in terms of clients looking at this, so with just the stat that I just spoke about, most clients don't know how much has already been committed to by that stage, by stage 3 or stage 4. So a lot of it has already been committed to, and any changes to that would probably rock the boat more. So I'd be looking at probably early stages and then getting your client involved in that as well.
And do you find then, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a client, um, of course, my initial thought and my main priority is going to be how much is this building going to cost, or how much is this project going to cost me?
Mhm.
Why playing slightly devil's advocate? Why would I be interested or bothered by how much it's going to cost me
Yeah.
over the life of the project, or is that quite a kind of a short sighted view of things?
I mean, it's another good question, Ben. So the thing is, it's a bit of a trade-off, isn't it? Do you want something that costs a lot, initially, but won't cost you much over a 60-year life plan? Or are you looking at something that costs way less, but then might incur more cost, when it comes to the energy use, when it comes to the maintenance, when it comes to even the replacement costs? Some assets have fairly big, chunky replacement cycles, maybe that come after every other year, and you know costs naturally inflate over time. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Which one do you want? And our role as QS is we're sitting there to just make those trade-offs visible at an early stage. We're saying, look, you can you can go for the cheaper item, but where you actually get value of the asset, comes in at a certain number of years. So I guess it's just the trade-offs.
Do you find that a lot of clients are receptive to that? Do you find that they think, actually, yeah, it might be worth me spending a little bit more upfront to save costs over time, or are you finding that the opposite is the case, that clients just understand the life cycle costing um, scenarios, but just they're like, okay, I understand that, but I still want a cheaper product, or not a cheaper product. That's probably unfair. Is I want my construction costs to be
Yeah.
reduced as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends with who you're speaking to and the type of client you're speaking to. So most developers were building for maybe leasing out an asset, or maybe they're building it to sell it off to someone else, might not particularly be interested in the life cycle costing of it. But then it also draws in the fact that the people who are going to buy the house, the FM teams, the facility managers, those people would have a keen interest in the operating cost of these assets. So those are the people who carry on the building until its end. So I feel like it's always good for people to stand in the middle and consider how things happen after they leave and that sort of thing. And in terms of resale value of assets as well, sometimes people, developers, are finding out that if you have your life cycle costing done, then maybe some people buying your asset will be more keen to buy it, just by the fact that a life cycle costing has been done, and that the sort of total cost has already been calculated for them. So it's definitely
Okay,
something that people have to think about. Yeah.
that's interesting. So the actual so actually doing a life cycle cost analysis could make the proposition or the asset more attractive to a potential purchaser, an end user, than if you're just presenting them with a building that hasn't had any kind of life cycle cost analysis. So it's not always about upfront cost, and it's not always about upfront cost and operational cost. Actually, it's sometimes about presenting the value of the asset in the first place if you're looking to sell it.
100%. 100%.
And do you? I mean, we're making the assumption here that automatically, if you spend more upfront, you're going to spend less along the life cycle of the project, and that vice versa is true. If you spend less upfront in the building of the project, that the operational costs are going to be higher. Is that are we being unfair there? Is that always the case, or does it always have to be one trading off against the other, or can you have, in an ideal world, a project, a building, an asset, whatever it might be, that has been um, that doesn't cost much more than usual to begin with, and also has low operational costs?
Yes, I mean it's possible. It's possible. All you have to have is a very dynamic cost and commercial team. If you're putting the different concepts together, you're looking at value engineering, you're looking at life cycle costing. Once all those things come up together, then you're looking at the optimum balance. You're looking at where you strike right in the middle to get your balance between the
Yeah,
cost, the upfront cost, and the life cycle cost. So really it's about how you address it, but making sure you've addressed it really early.
yeah. It's a theme that we always come back to on this podcast, is get your design team in early, get a
Yeah.
good bunch of consultants around the table, but also get a bunch of consultants around the table that have bought into the targets and the vision for that particular project, and they will find that equilibrium of sensible upfront costs, but also sensible operating costs. Your capex versus
Yep.
your opex.
100%.
Um, and so, in your position then, as senior cost consultant, if you've got a client who is interested in capex and opex, and understands the difference between the two and wants to find that balance, what's your approach to them? How do you approach them when balancing the capex, the opex, and how do you advise a client on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the key to is always, aligning ourselves to the client's objectives. For example, a long-term asset holder will usually see the value in a higher upfront spend for lower operating costs, naturally. And, if you're not looking to own the asset for a long time, then, you'd be more geared into the capital cost. So I guess it's going back to the point we spoke about earlier, it's about understanding the objectives of the client, understanding what they want out of the asset. If they're looking to sell it off to people on a, maybe let's say, 10-year lease, 20-year lease, then we'll be explaining to them that it's actually worth doing these life cycle costing exercises, just so that you can understand how much you'll be incurring at different stages, and just really help them in choosing the design as well. So just design led decisions, really.
And your experience is mostly in, as I understand it, kind of commercial buildings,
Yes.
maybe industrial buildings and so on, where whole life cycle costing um, is quite often used.
Mhm.
Presumably, is something that is has been fairly widely adopted. Um, and this isn't necessarily a question because I know that your experience may not be in residential, but it's interesting that that hasn't yet fully bled through to the residential sector, unless I'm missing something. You would think that a customer buying a house would perhaps find that particular house more attractive if they knew that their operating costs over the 60-year life cycle of a house was going to be less than maybe if they bought from another developer
Yep.
or
Yep.
bought secondhand. And I think it's already well established that secondhand houses and older stock houses are definitely less energy efficient to run, and therefore that leads to higher builds. So I think there's a, a general acceptance and an understanding that houses, new houses, cost less to run.
Mhm.
Um, but it's interesting that actually you don't really see many developers, volume developers, or smaller developers implementing a bit of life cycle costing analysis and then explaining that to the customer and saying, well, you can buy a
Yeah.
house down the road that's being built, and it would cost you roughly X per year to run. But actually, if you build one of ours, we've done some proper testing and some proper analysis, and it could cost you even less.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not something that was widely adopted before, but I will say that it's something that's really coming up. There've been a lot of legislative pressures, councils changing their sort of rules around, sustainability, long-term performance, and that sort of thing. So it's something that's coming up. It might be slow to adopt, like most things in the construction industry, but once it gets rolling, then people will really see the value of it. It's not only in cost. You get to look at sustainability as well. You get to look at just consideration of the environment and how things are going to be broken down, because it stretches right to the end of life costs, right? So you understanding what's involved at every stage, and just dropping it down into the 60 years of the asset, which I think a lot of people find value in. So that's a good point there.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. So let's talk about some kind of practical examples then, because at the moment, we've talked very much about the theory of capex and opex and
Yep.
life cycle costing and so on. So have you got any practical examples of where higher upfront investment, higher construction cost has actually delivered very clear,
Yep.
tangible, long-term value over the life cycle of the asset?
So a good example would be building services, looking particularly at M&E plant. Um, if you think of air source heat pumps, you could either look at getting a gas boiler system, which has a very lower sort of capital expenditure. So if you're looking at upfront cost of gas boilers and the sort of system, that was previously used, the cost will be really low. Air source heat pumps will come and be fairly chunky and would, probably fill up your cost plan. But
Mm.
if you look at the long-term performance of a gas boiler and the long-term performance of the air source heat pumps, you find out that, over maybe, let's say, 10 years, you'd have spent less on your energy, on your replacement costs, and even just maintenance itself, with the air source heat pumps rather than the gas boiler. So then it brings in that comparison. Obviously, it's a very elementary example, but it shows you the comparison between, we've got something that costs a lot upfront. Over time it will cost us less. We've got something that costs us, significantly less upfront, and then over time the cost will balloon. Maybe now we're paying twice as much as we got it upfront. So that's an
Mm.
example there. And when you moderate everything over time, the total cost of ownership, turns out lower if you're using that life cycle costing method that I just explained.
And there's clearly a demand for it amongst, I'm thinking again more about residential customers.
Yeah,
There's definitely a demand there, or an interest in and an appreciation of lower bills over time versus upfront capex costs. Because you know, you walk down the street now and there's so many houses that have had PV panels,
oh yeah,
retrofitted to them, so not part of the original construction, but there's loads of solar panels around now. So people are clearly open to paying more upfront because they recognise they're going to get lower bills over time, and so there's no reason at all why they shouldn't appreciate that in a full-on new build. I mean, I don't know if you know the answer to this, so please tell me if not. But air source heat pumps, are you expected to replace them every 15, 20 years, or are they replaced on a regular basis like gas boilers? You buy a house and you expect to have to replace the gas boiler within, I don't know, 10 years perhaps. Is it the same for air source heat pumps, or do they last a lot longer?
yes. It's all dependent on the manufacturer. It depends which sort of SOC pump you're getting. Different ones have different lifespans, but generally you'd find that your SOC pump has a longer lifespan than your gas boiler, or maybe you might need less maintenance and that sort of thing. But it goes back to the point that we're speaking about. As long as all of these considerations have been made at an early stage, then it can influence design. And at the end of the day, you're saving yourself a lot of money by just factoring in your life cycle costs. And like you just explained with the PVs and retrofitting them, it's obviously a lot of people who have a keen interest in keeping their bills low, and they want this sort of thing going on. And I guess the prerogative goes back to the developers themselves, and them also considering the people who buy their houses long term. And then when all of that meets together, I guess people will see the value in the life cycle costing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I'm putting my developer hat on, though, I'm saying, well, all these costs up front are ruining our viabilities. There's the future home standard, Part L,
Mhm.
the extra regulation costs are hurting the actual financial feasibility of the site to begin with. But that's probably a topic for another podcast, so we won't go down that road just yet. We can talk about that on another date and another time. I suppose the last thing that we wanted to really talk about, or I wanted to really discuss, was going back to the kind of challenges. So we've established that um, sometimes in many cases, higher upfront costs can lead to lower operational costs, and that from the consumer side of things and the customer side of things, there's a general appreciation that actually that is a something worth paying for upfront if you have lower, longer term
Mhm.
bills. Um, so, what are the usual kind of blockers and challenges then, from a cost point of view, to life cycle costing analysis and those kinds of design changes being adopted on projects?
Um, in practice, I'd say short-term pressures. You're looking at like we said, budgets, tight budgets in what we do, a lot of tight programs as well. Um, people looking to get things out fairly quickly without having to look at things that maybe processes that may take a bit longer. So those are the main constraints, I say. And maybe if you look at procurement routes as well, some procurement routes such as say design and build have a sort of keen interest in the upfront cost so that we can settle that before we go on. So a lot of people would be looking to move things on faster. So that's really what it is. There's also an issue of uncertainty in life cycle assumptions. We might not know if legislation changes, for example. We might not know if unforeseen events happen, like a war, and that would stop oil flows and bills would go higher and that sort of thing. So a lot of people might be a bit skeptical of, will we actually get value of this? But the thing is, a lot of constraints are built into these processes, and they would have been stress tested. They would have gone through different models, different perambulations, just to actually get to a stage where we say, this is an estimate that we are 99.9% sure that will fall in a certain range. So
Mm.
I mean, it's really making a decision. It's about making a decision.
It's always the case, isn't it, that the program is always tight, the costs are always tight. You get planning on a site, and you and clients and developers quite understandably and quite rightly want to get onto site as quickly as possible because they've paid for the land and they've paid for the planning and they want to get onto site and start
Yep.
building the project. But it goes back to what we were saying before and what we've said on previous podcasts. And it's easy for me to say sitting here in my little podcast chair, but taking that breath, getting the design team in order,
Yep.
getting the design team thinking about these whole life cycle costs, and taking it from there really, and building that time into your program so you're
Mm.
not scrabbling around halfway through the design process or halfway through build, trying to also trying to almost kind of shoehorn in um, uh, products and services into your project that will deliver lower operational costs as a bit of an afterthought. You want to get that all done on paper before you even put a spade in the ground.
Yeah, 100%. And basically, what we're saying is we're not saying to clients, we want you to pay more. We're saying we want you to consider the whole life cost of your asset, really. So
Yeah,
that's the bottom line there.
exactly. It's keeping the client informed, keeping everybody informed, and the decision ultimately is up to them.
100%.
Excellent. Is there anything else you wanted to go through on life cycle costing before we wrap up?
Just to build up on what you said, a lot of it comes up to cost. And since we're cost and commercial professionals, but there's also other sides to it. If you look at legislative pressure, if you look at different construction frameworks as well, if you think about the BRE EAM, the BREEAM that we work with, and the future home standards, things are changing, and these life cycle costing exercises are becoming the standard of cost and commercial teams in the construction
Hmm.
industry. So it would definitely lead itself there and become more popular with the coming years.
So your advice to someone, a client who's got a project is, and it's not started yet, they're assembling a design team. What would your advice be to them? Presumably, start thinking now about life cycle costing.
100%. Start as early as you can. It can also be a tool for risk mitigation. You're making decisions early. You're picking up the big cost drivers early, and not just the cost drivers in your upfront cost, but your cost drivers in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, at different intervals. So, you know, can't stress it more than that. Ben,
Hmm.
get in early. Start making these decisions as soon as you can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we are out of time. Gerrad, if anybody wants to get in touch with you to talk more about life cycle costing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, you can email me, Gerrad Mukuyu at brookbanks.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'll be happy to have a conversation. It's GERRAD MUKUYU.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You can also go, as usual, to brookbanks.com. You can find out all about everything we do. You can meet the team, you can contact the team, find out more about life cycle costing, or whatever's interesting you at the moment in the construction industry. So it remains for me to say, Gerrad Mukuyu, thank you very much for your time today on the Brookbanks podcast. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time.